What up, comrades? This is Jesse, your friendly neighborhood communist cat dad and de facto producer for the Epoch of Incredulity. When we started recording this episode, I cut my finger open on a soup can and then ran into issues with my router, so I was mostly absent from the discussion. I did, however, invest in a long Ethernet cable as to prevent similar recording issues in future episodes. Hopefully my cats don't chew up that cable, as they are wont to do. That said, let's get on with the discourse. This episode is entitled Slave Wages, and will feature the collective wisdom of comrades Scott, Joe, and Kit. Enjoy your epoch, you enlightened motherfuckers. The epoch of incredulity. From the Boston Commune.
It's amazing that like the economy is like disintegrating in real time, but because like the Nasdaq, the Dow Jones, and the S&P 500 are nominally appear to be doing okay, no one seems to care. Why is the stock market doing so well? The Federal Reserve is pumping trillions upon trillions upon trillions upon tens of trillions of dollars to prop the damn thing up. So the little line on the stock market app looks happy, but that's because the Fed, for the first time ever, is buying up corporate bond debt, which means there is no such thing as a private enterprise anymore because the Federal Reserve is buying corporate debt. On top of the fact that the unemployment numbers, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, came out today. U6 unemployment, which is the real unemployment rate, not the rate that is usually cited in like articles and whatnot. Real unemployment dropped from 21.2% in May to 18% in the month of June. So, sure, the stock market's up, but 18% of the adult age population doesn't have a job right now. And it's estimated that 53 million Americans will not have health insurance by the end of this year. But sure, things are great.
Living in America.
It's just so surreal that, like, everything's disintegrating, and yet all we hear about is how we've turned the corner. We're back. Everything's fine. Today, Reuters announced that COVID cases in the United States is top 3 million.
I mean, it's a case of like the society of the spectacle and a little bit of capitalist realism of like we are falling apart as an empire, but because industry is getting its way with like in businesses reopening and people being forced to go back to work and people being sacrificed to the blood altar of capitalism, that we really are seeing that hyper-normalization and that true cognitive dissonance of a society of internal rot, internal collapse, but the outward projection that, you know, we're doing fine. Everything's great.
Yeah, the cognitive dissonance is extreme. And it's kind of like, it's very surreal to watch, and it's kind of mind-blowing to watch it, like, the pundit bureau being like, everything's fine, but like, I don't know if this is like this is a wrong take, but like psychologically it was easier to me like watching everything be like visibly in a state of collapse, like visibly like disintegrated, like back in like late March to early May when it was like everything was visibly disintegrating, as opposed to like this like managed decline of like the empire's like collapse. Like, now we're in a managed decline because the Federal Reserve has vowed to print as many trillions of dollars out of thin air as is necessary to prop up the stock market. But we can't be bothered to, I don't know, send $1,200 to people. In fact, actually, what's stunning is how poor the average American, like average Americans are. Sure, we have an economy of $20 trillion, and the nominally average GDP is like 50,000 or whatever. But like in April, when the Paycheck Protection Program first went into motion and like they started sending out the checks, the poverty rate actually dropped despite 25 million people losing their jobs in the same month. Poverty actually dropped because $600 is so much to so many people in this country. Like that's like make or break for so many people. The poverty rate actually dropped despite tens of millions of people losing their job at the same exact time.
We'd like to remind people that isn't because unemployment pays people too much. It's because wages are too low. It's because jobs pay too little.
It's starvation wages. Like
Slave labor.
it's slave labor. I think it was someone like talking about Joe Jorgensen on social media that I saw, and talking about how like, oh, it's so great, like she wants to abolish the minimum wage, and like the look on my face, I could see like out of the corner of my eye, like through a mirror, like the facial expression on my face when I saw that, it like I visibly like my jaw kind of dropped, and I like lost some color in my face when I saw that. Vote for Joe Jorgensen. She wants to abolish the minimum wage. It's like, no, because there's a reason. There's a very good reason we have the minimum wage laws that we do. We had this problem. We experienced this problem at the turn of the 20th century when corporations were paying their workers just enough money so they wouldn't starve to death, but nothing better than that. That's why we have the minimum wage in the first place. We tried that experiment. It didn't work. Companies have been have shown themselves over the decades, time and again, that they will pay people as little as legally allowed. Allowing them to do what they want is like, okay, we're going to go back to like Walmart paying people like $2 an hour.
That's still like what is the average salary or like rate for a waitress in a major city? It's still like $3 or $4 dollars an hour.
Legally,
rely on tips.
Legally, like before tips, minimum wage for like people like waitresses is $2.13 an hour.
Yeah.
Before tips. Legally, they're supposed to cover it, but my mom was like actually waited tables a lot, and actually fairly recently as well. Sure, they're supposed to cover the difference if tips don't make it up, but what actually ends up happening is that the employer will usually just like, not pay them that and just like cook the books and be like, oh, well, we paid them, but in reality, it's like bookkeeping kind of shit.
I would type this in the chat, but I can't. I just sliced my finger open, so I have to figure that out.
You heard it first, people. Jesse has sliced his finger open. Oh my god.
Yeah, but like, okay, so minimum wage has always been one of these issues where it's relatively clear that the need for employees is kind of just like it's inelastic. You need exactly as many employees as you need. Employees are always the most expensive thing, or at least a very large contributing factor to expenses, and therefore the target of a lot of pressure. But you can't, like, even when you increase minimum wage, you tend not to, or there haven't been that many cases, there have been very, very few cases that people have not hired as many people, because if you have work for 5 people, then you have work for 5 people, and that's it. Paying them more or less, that's never really mattered. But by having people able to be members of the economy, able to buy some things they like and not just sustaining food and nothing else, has always been very, very helpful to get everyone employed and generally boost employment. Currently, I think Arizona still only has the federal minimum wage. I'm not aware of anyone else, which is like $4.50 an hour or something.
It's currently $7.25 an hour, and it's not just Arizona, unfortunately.
Oh no.
It's many others. If you look through, it's almost the entire South. It's $7.25 an hour. In some cases, disabled workers can be legally paid like $1 an hour under federal.
What?
Like, yes, that's the thing. Like workers who are like physically and or mentally disabled workers. It's tucked into like employment law that like they can be paid like $1 an hour legally.
Where is this?
This is federal law.
Oh.
I am apparently super out of date on my federal minimum wage. That is pretty cool, though. I'm glad that it has at least gone up from since I checked, just like 2006.
Well, the last minimum wage increase was done in 2009 when they raised the minimum wage from $5.50 an hour to $7.25 an hour.
A real livable wage.
Just so like everyone listening to this podcast knows, $7.25 an hour is not very much money. Apparently that is the yearly minimum wage of $15,080.
7.25 times 2,080. You come to $15,080 a year is what you will make on $7.25.
Yeah, and I don't know about you all, but like I pay more than that in rent.
I still remember my first job. I got paid $8 an hour, and the pay was like for 8 hours of work, you got like maybe $40 a shift after taxes.
And that also is just on the line when it comes to federal poverty.
The most disturbing thing about that is my first job in the grand scheme of things wasn't too long ago. It was only 2012. The minimum wage in Massachusetts in 2012 was $8 an hour.
Have we raised it to, or are we pending to raise it to 15?
Yeah, so the 15 passed, it was just delayed. So it's in sections that it included things like removing Sunday overtime magic, which means that it's not ideal because a lot of people did require that. And so some people took a pay cut in the meantime.
The reason that the time and a half was cut is because it was part of this great grand bargain kind of thing in 2018, where there was a ballot question to raise the fair share amendment that would have raised taxes by taxing incomes of over $1 million. And then the Supreme Judicial Court that summer decided to rule it as unconstitutional for bullshit reasons. And then the minimum wage, there was also another ballot question to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, but then that got took off the ballot when the legislature finally got off its ass and passed it, and Baker signed it. However, the minimum wage law that passed is actually worse than the minimum wage law that was on the ballot because they dragged it, they spaced it out, the increases over a longer period of time. So right as of now, the minimum wage is $12.75 an hour, and the minimum wage won't get to $15 an hour until January 1st, 2023. So realistically, when you adjust for inflation, by the time it finally gets to $15 an hour, that minimum wage will probably realistically only be worth $13 an hour after inflation, because we did it 5 years ago.
Yeah, so the Raise the Wage Act is $8.40 in 2019, $9.50 in 2020, $10.60 in 2021, $11.70 in 2022, $12.80 in 2023, $13.90 in 2024, and $15 in 2025.
And that's Massachusetts?
That's the federal wage.
And that's
federal, okay.
Because we're still at $7 an hour federally.
Ah.
We're at $12.75 in Massachusetts as of right now. Mind you, they passed this most recent state level minimum wage increase 2 years ago. 2 years ago, the minimum wage was $11 an hour. We've moved $1.75 in 2 years. Can't even buy a newspaper with that.
We're very progressive.
$1.75. You can't even buy the Boston Globe with that.
And the reason the Fair Share Amendment was act was because it included what they called two unrelated bills in it. It was the tax and make this a fund for education, and there is no bundling allowed. This is problematic because the goal to try and fully fund education requires some amount of money.
Yes.
So the reason it was put this way was because you can't have a provision to require the state to pay some amount of stipend in a ballot initiative, which is horrifying. But you can't do that because that's our state's constitution. I don't actually know why we can't do that. So maybe it will happen again, except with recommendation language rather than insist language. But that would work a lot better if we didn't have a Republican governor, because recommendation language isn't so great.
It happened because Baker is the one who made, he appointed half of the current Supreme Judicial Court. And they all were like, no, we don't want to make rich people pay for giving money to the T in education. Because it was supposed to be
take the money, bro.
Yeah, because the money that was supposed to be taken for the Fair Share Act was supposed to go to the T, or transportation in general, but most likely would have gone to the T, and education. But God forbid we do that, so we're going to rule that as unconstitutional for bullshit reasons. I mean, it's not like we have a flat income tax at the state level. Oh, wait a minute, we do, right? Is that. So God forbid we make rich people actually pay more than 5% of their income. Theoretically, we could do that now, but that's never going to go through the legislature. The legislature in Massachusetts is where things go to die. So that's not happening either. I mean, the only reason they passed the minimum wage bill through the legislature is because they didn't want the voters showing them up again. Because the last minimum wage increase in Massachusetts was done at the ballot box in 2014. And they didn't want 2 election cycles in a row where the voters forced the minimum wage up because the legislature can't be bothered to do anything.
What we really need is another one that fixes the minimum wage based on inflation. Exactly.
Fixing it to both inflation and productivity, because it's not enough to just peg. I don't think it's enough to peg it at inflation alone, because if if you look at all the macroeconomic studies have borne out the numbers that if the federal minimum wage kept up with productivity as it had up until like the late 70s, it would currently be $24 an hour.
Yes.
That would be what the federal minimum wage would be if it kept up productivity since the late 70s, which is where the two lines started to diverge.
And what happened in the 70s?
Neoliberalism.
takeover, yeah.
We're of the same mind. Fuck, Jimmy Carter, man.
Yes, Jimmy Carter.
He was the first of the neoliberal presidents. He was a neoliberal president with a New Deal Congress. It is so weird because Congress did not want to do anything he wanted to do. We don't want to deregulate the banks. What the fuck are you doing? It's 1978.
Was that a byproduct of, did Carter just have good, bad policies, or, was he pressured?
No, he just had bad policies because he was, he had been, the Democratic governor of Georgia before becoming elected president, so...
All I know is the big story that, he divested from his peanut farm, which made him a good person for some reason, and everybody kept telling that story in 2016, or up to, the lead up to 2016, because Trump wasn't, letting go of his businesses, and I'm just why? Okay, Jimmy Carter. Yeah, there's a bunch of other presidents. Yeah, exactly. There was a bunch of other presidents that
every other president.
So many other presidents haven't divested. It's who cares?
But it does matter because he's giving himself tax breaks. He's giving himself relief. The Trump Towers is able to apply for CARES Act relief. Do we know if they did? No, that's not public record. But no, seriously, Trump is giving himself money. And
it's true. But the bar is dropped so low that people don't care anymore.
That's horrifying. That's making someone both the law and you can't have someone who's above the law. This is clearly blatant self-interest, and there's no reason any of those large corporations needed tax bailouts. They really didn't. This is
of course
stupid.
They didn't. They just wanted one.
Yeah,
they just wanted one. They didn't. Of course, they didn't need it. Apple doesn't need another bailout. Walmart doesn't need another bailout. They want one. There's a difference. In life, there's needs. There's a difference between needs and wants. Large corporations, they didn't need another bailout. Of course, they don't need another bailout, but they wanted one. Average Americans desperately need to be bailed out, but that's not going to happen because they can't give to super PACs as much money as, say, Jeff Bezos. So, our concerns aren't really as relevant in the minds of the state managers of this society.
And at the same time, something I just realized is that Trump is actually the completion of the project that was begun in the 70s, the neoliberal, really what the point of that was the destruction of the New Deal and the New Deal policies. And Trump, that final tax cut, that huge corporate bailout.
I like to call it a tax heist.
Yeah, the corporate bailout is I like to call it because that's what it is. And there's been more since. That was meant to be the final blow against the New Deal. And it all began in the 70s with neoliberalism and Jimmy Carter and peanut farms.
I would argue that both Trump and McConnell are the final culmination of this because McConnell's whole political career has actually been to prevent another New Deal from ever happening again. That's why he's so laser focused on the courts, so that to ensure that if, God forbid, a social democrat becomes president, what we ever do, if this said social democrat can say Medicare for all by some stroke of luck, gets it through both the House and the Senate to his desk and signs it, you can have the Supreme Court or the federal appellate courts, who McConnell has been spending a couple decades stacking full of far-right wackadoodles to be able to shoot that down. No, Medicare for all is unconstitutional for blah, 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 and X, Y, and Z for reasons we have just created as of now to serve our purposes. His whole career has been this, about making sure that New Deal policies that become really popular and create a electoral hegemony do not ever happen again.
Yeah.
Because one of the side effects of having really popular policies is in the 30s was Democrats were really popular, and those policies got them reelected to massive landslides over and over and over again. And by trying to prevent policies like those from ever succeeding ever again, that's the main goal. And I also do agree that Trump is he is really the president that we as a society deserve.
Oh, definitely.
He's the way he thinks about things is the purest form of capitalist machinations and I think about everything in terms of like, what can I like? How can I profit or like prosper off? It's like that's like how his decision-making process is, and like it's the purest form of capitalism. I think Chapo was talking about this like 2 years ago. I don't know why it just popped in my head now, but it's like so true. He is like the purest form of like anarcho-capitalism, and he really is kind of what we deserve as a society. He was raised as like the, you know, your generic rich boy, and he is all like he has all like the style and the blunder and the bluster, and he doesn't really have anything behind him to back it up, which is kind of what neoliberalism is in a way.
Kind of also what fascism is.
Yeah. I mean, fascism is like basically this giant multi-level marketing scheme.
Yeah,
I mean, like all about style, and there's nothing really there at the end except for like repackaging the same thing over and over again.
And I'll let you continue in a second, but what's interesting to me is that I see McConnell as being like more the politically fascist side of like the modern American fascism, whereas like Trump is like the economic and cultural side. They work together.
That is exactly how it works, if you ask me. Trump is not really the guy who wants to govern. He's just the front man for it. McConnell's the one doing all of the actual work. Like, I think it was Dick Cheney who said this, where if you want to do something really evil, make it really, really boring. Aside from like the onion memes about McConnell, he's a very boring man.
He just looks like a turtle.
He does look like Kermit the Frog.
But also, have you read any legislation? Like, oh my gosh, I can't tell if this includes horrendous bailout language. Even something as quickly written as the CARES Act, I wouldn't understand just reading it how racist it is because it only goes through traditional banking structures. All of this is happening partially because all of this legislation is made by privatized think tanks funded by the industries they're supposed to be regulating. But also it's really hard to read. Like, I have a college degree. I'm not like the most lawyerly person ever, but I think law is pretty cool and I read it. Federal law is hard to read.
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Really
Absolutely.
hard to read.
Yeah. It's like robot corporate language that's like made to make you feel like alienated and strange.
And doesn't summarize anything. And doesn't organize anything.
No.
Nothing specific.
Nothing's even like thematically connected. Here's this random amendment to this bill that makes Puerto Rico not have bailout magic. Like, that was an amendment to a bill. No reason for why that's in here. Just well, tagged on at the end.
Well, that's kind of how it works. You just kind of add writers. And also, that's another thing I kind of wanted to touch on was Parmesia from 2016. No one wants to talk about this in the liberal press because, oh, wait a minute, this was an incredibly shitty thing Obama did on his way out the door in the summer of 2016. Puerto Rico was in a significant debt crisis, and one of the really unfortunate side effects of not being a state is, as a colony, Puerto Rico is not entitled or has no rights to federal disaster aid money. They were stuck in the cycle of disaster capitalism, of being like tens of billions of dollars into debt, in a way of being able to come up with the money to solve this problem. And so Obama institutes this thing called Parmesia, and it was basically, Obama put the island of Puerto Rico under the rule of an unelected fiscal austerity board, which then started cutting all public services to the bone so that they could pay like the tourism industry in Puerto Rico and things like that. And so when Maria happened, there was no money to fix any kind of infrastructure because Puerto Rico was broke as fuck and under the thumb of a autocratic fiscal management board. But no one wants to talk about that because it happened under a Democratic president.
I'm back, yo. I'll talk about it.
How's the finger?
It's fine.
You'll survive?
Yeah. I opened the soup can and the lid was like sharp.
Heard it here first. It was sharp.
Just like politics. I got a laugh. I got one laugh at least.
It made me laugh, so that's good enough.
And, okay, this is why I was just pointing frantically. Right now, my background on Zoom is from Hamilton, from the movie.
Yes, and Miranda supported Parmesia.
Exactly. He exploited his own fucking island. Fuck him. And Hamilton sucks. Fuck Hamilton.
I was at my parents' last night, and they were confused as to why I told my grandparents we were trying to watch it. And this is like right before I getting ready to go to work on Sunday. I was like, I refuse to watch this shit. Like, one of my friends tried like watching it like last night, and it broke his brain. I'm not spending 3 hours of my life.
I don't know if it broke my
some...
brain, but
Well, it sounded like from like the live tweeting, from what I was able to see the notifications, because I still haven't caught up on the Slack chat, because like I just wasn't on it this weekend. I was only like sporadically responding to like notifications and like outside of the app. So I was like, yeah, I'm not spending 3 hours of my life on shit libs that I already know I'm gonna hate. Like, why subject myself to that degree of masochism? And so I go to my parents' place last night, and they're like baffled as to why I refuse to watch Hamilton, because they're both libs. And I was like, dude, like Hamilton as a person sucked, and as a history major, I'm offended alone that it took such significant historical liberties. That alone is enough to offend me. Where like they whitewashed Hamilton from what I've heard. They tried to make the whole like all of the American founding fathers like turn it into like a feel-good story. It's like, no, this isn't a story about a bunch of white slave owners trying to avoid paying their taxes.
Yeah.
No, this is something else.
Like throughout it, there's a lot of like moments where Hamilton like wishes that one day they'll be able to like reach a point where they can abolish slavery, but it's like Hamilton like profited from the slave trade. He was very okay with it. So like that was the thing. It's like it mostly just fucking annoyed me. Like it's very good musical. Like I'm not a huge fan of musical theater, and I was very well entertained by it. But it's just like Lin-Manuel is a huge ego, and he fucking sucks. He's the worst fucking person in it, but he had to be the lead because of his ego. But like it's just like here's the thing: it's like there's so much potential with casting this story with an all African American cast, because you can do something where it's like it really interrogates like who those men really were. And from that perspective, from an African-American perspective, and to just like have an African-American cast do a fucking like Disney-fied version of like these like colonizers and slave owners, I'm like, what the fuck are you doing, dude? Like it's like you're a good songwriter. You can like you have created this wonderful piece of art, and like wherever the fuck it will land in our culture. Again, I don't think it'll have much relevance in like 10 or 15 years, but it's like you had so much more you could have done with this, and it boils down to the fact that Lin-Manuel Miranda identifies with Alexander Hamilton's story, because Lin-Manuel Miranda is inherently just like a fucking like a neoliberal guy, and because he identified with Alexander Hamilton, he's not going to like actually go at his legacy in like a real like vicious way. He's going to Disney-fy it because that's who he is as a dude, and that's what he's been doing his entire career. So it didn't really break my brain so much as it just fucking annoyed me, and like the last 40 minutes of it again, because again it's a 3-hour thing. The last 40 minutes of it was just complete white noise, and I was just like, whatever. So that's my review of Hamilton.
I do wish that rather than talking about all of the American revolutionaries were very complicit in the slave trade. Like, absolutely all of them were complicit. Hamilton
actually,
personally...
there's one exception, actually.
Really?
There was one exception. Thomas Paine, who is actually the father of socialism. His works influenced Marx.
I've been making my way through Black Reconstruction along with the Marx Madness guys. I mean, it was W.E.B. Du Bois. It's not Dubois. I have
Boys.
It's Du Bois.
Yeah, Du Bois.
But that text like really brings into relief there was sort of like a clave. Like right now we have these overlapping dialectics in regard to we have the very clear sort of white supremacy and a repression of indigenous, Black and Hispanic people in this country, and that struggle for basic civil liberties. And then we have this other long-standing struggle for economic equality that is it seems almost like it's a very white movement, because as white people, we've always had the power when it came to that sort of just basic human rights on the social strata. And a lot of the anti-slavery rhetoric coming from the North was, it was not about civil liberties. It was about cementing the North's place in the labor market so that they wouldn't be outcompeted by the South, which didn't have to pay its workers.
It was never about the kindness of the North's hearts. It was
right.
It was an economic motivation, which I always find. I learned this in college because I had a Marxist U.S. history professor, and he made the same exact argument. He's like, yeah, the North wasn't like making this abolitionist like case because it was the moral thing to do. there was the economic incentive of we want to grind the South under our boots because we actually have to pay our workers, and the South doesn't. So the only way to truly put the South under our boot and crush it is to force the issue of slavery, because if they are put on the same footing in terms of wages as we are, we're going to crush them completely on every single front. There is the economic incentive. Sure, it sounds like Northern abolitionists are coming at this from religious angles or abolition liberatory rhetoric, but there's the economic point of view of the textile industry does not want to have to compete with the southern textile industry, particularly in New England, where the textile industry was dominant, paying the low mill girls, for example, at a commensurate market rate, whereas people like plantations in South Carolina or Georgia or Virginia aren't paying their workers anything because their workers are technically under the law, not people. Therefore, do not have to be paid anything. Forget about commensurate market rate. They're technically under the law, not people. So you can see how the mills want abolition, not because it's necessarily the right thing to do, but it's because it helps their market power and their market share.
And it's one of things like that, I think, are one of the reasons why the North and the country as a whole hasn't actually reckoned with racism, and the legacy of slavery and all those things, because when we abolished slavery, when we fought the Civil War, we could always look at another reason, it's that we're doing it because it's the secession of the South, or we're doing it for the economic reasons. But ultimately we created a narrative where it's the reason we did it was because we wanted to abolish slavery. We wanted to free the slaves. But in reality, it's that was the last reason,
Sapping the South's capacity to make war. That was the actual reason. The reason behind the Emancipation Proclamation. And this gets historicized the wrong way. This gets kind of whitewashed. It has how the mainstream history of the Emancipation Proclamation is. It didn't free all of the slaves in the North. It freed the slaves in the southern states, so that they could not work on the plantations or in the war effort. It had nothing to do with the slaves in the North. It had everything to only apply to slaves in occupied territories of the Confederacy. And the other reason to push the Emancipation Proclamation, again, not a moralistic reason, but was to keep the British from continuing to interfere with the war effort, because the Confederacy had been secretly funded and armed by the British, because the British saw an opportunity to try to lay claim to the United States once again by proxy. But their involvement was basically nixed after the war becomes about slavery, because the British had abolished slavery in their own holdings 30 years earlier. And so if the British were found to have been involved in a war involving the slave trade, again, that would have been very unpopular at home in London. So they kind of had to back off. And that was the idea or the inspiration behind the Emancipation Proclamation. It was to stop the South's war effort, both economically in terms of manpower, but also in terms of foreign interference. None of this had anything to do with Lincoln's desire to free the slaves.
I think there's a lot more, even more recent examples of people doing things that are major touchstones for reasons that are kind of selfish, or at least highly rewarded. And then those people being dismissed or not having their stories told, which ends up with a very weird narrative. So the example I'm going to pick here is Jackie Robinson, who, if anyone doesn't know, was the first Black player in baseball, in Major League Baseball. And he wasn't just so good that they just suddenly was allowed to play. That isn't how it worked. Branch Rickey, who was the manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, decided, hey, we could get an advantage if we also looked at Black players, started looking around, found Robinson, who had previously gone to other tryouts. He had tried out at the Red Sox, which was the last team to integrate. But
Boston, you're my town.
Boston was the last group to integrate. Yep, well done. Well done.
Last team to integrate in the year 1959, 12 years after the fact.
Of that dirty water.
Yeah, okay. So Boston sucks sometimes. Anyway, Branch Rickey is like the reason that Jackie Robinson's name's known. I don't actually know, like, Branch Rickey's name is just not known. I've never seen, like, it's not that he should be known in that sense, but the way that these stories are silenced ends up meaning that there's not really any narrative of people being good other than white saviors, which are another problematic thing. Like, Branch Rickey got rich off of this. Jackie Robinson was an incredible player, and he made them, like, way, way more than he got played. I'm not going to say he's doing it for good reasons. I have no idea what his reasons were, but he still did it. And we've just, like, silenced that story along with so many others of people being like, if I could employ people, if I didn't have to discriminate, then I would have so many better employees, so much bigger of a talent pool, so much more diverse of holdings. I could actually make products for sets of people. I could reach across those lines. And yet, no, we don't allow that because they're dirty, or because, like, I don't want to say that these are good people. They're not necessarily good people.
Yeah.
But it's actually hard to motivate people by saying, be a good person. This is what good people do. It is a lot easier to say, who made hundreds of thousands of dollars off of doing more for diversity? This dude.
And it's like, it's like an interesting, like, this is the best and worst thing about capitalism, is that, like, capitalism does actually allow for, like, advancement, but at the same time, it only allows for it when it's convenient for it. So, like, for as much as capitalism allows social progression, it also keeps it back. So, like, I mean, that's the real reason why, not the real reason, there's a million reasons why we need to take down capitalism, but, like, that's one of the reasons, is that, like, there was, like, gay marriage wasn't, like, politically accepted until, like, very recently, whereas culturally it was. It's only because, like, capitalism, like, allowed it.
I will also point out that this generally doesn't work. Like, Kaepernick still does not have a team to play with, and Colin Kaepernick is a damn good player who could make someone a lot of money.
Yeah.
But he got blacklisted.
Right. So, like, this is not a good... I think it would be better if these sorts of stories were told. And I admit I have not seen Hamilton, and that was the type of story I was hoping was told. I guess I'm wrong. I'm still not going to pay $500 to see it. I have no idea if I'll actually see a YouTube video ever.
The real story of Hamilton should be told, not this story of Hamilton.
Hamilton's an interesting figure. Like, he didn't personally own slaves. I can't actually blame him for his mother owning slaves. Like, not that I don't want to. I don't know. Like, I'm living in a capitalist society. I'm taking money from some bad people, at least indirectly. I try and be good with it. I try and, like, give it to candidates who will take more money from them. But, like, that's a thing that, okay, I live in a capitalist society. I can't backtrace every single one of my purchases, though I really wish I could. I don't want to be buying underwear that was made by exploited people in Cambodia. I mean, like, you can pick thousands of examples, but it's really hard. I also, like, if someone is angry at me in the future for buying underwear from Cambodia, we are in such good future. You're allowed to be as angry as you like. Glad we went that direction. Thank you.
I feel like that would be an ideal society if we got, if people were getting angry for us for our actual decisions on things like that. I personally, to some degree, actually don't want to know where, like, my money's going, because I already know that, like, of the four of us, I have by far the most evil employers. I mean, for fuck's sake, my employer is the parent company of the Pinkerton Agency. So, like, I already know they're incredibly evil. And I don't want to know, like, just how evil it is, because I feel like that would be more heartbreaking.
I mean, my company has been known to use child slavery, so...
Oh, yeah, that too.
Pretty bad, bro.
I mean, that's just what I know of, just with a quick Google search of, like, looking at the first two results. So, like, they're that evil with one Google search. So, like, I don't even know. But, like, it's funny. My parents last night, when I pointed out that, like, sure, Hamilton didn't own any slaves, but he was complicit in it. My mom just immediately retorts, "Oh, he was too poor to own slaves." Like, what? That's not a good convincing argument for why he's, like, shouldn't be, like, you know, treated as, like, this shitty person. Like, oh, he didn't own slaves, but that's only because he was too poor to own any slaves. That's not really helping the argument. Also, very interesting. Paine took he was an atheist, which is kind of a very bold thing to be public about in the 18th century, because that was something that like got you blackballed instantly. A couple years before he died, he made the point of publicly calling out and critiquing the organized Christianity for like corrupting the values of altruistic religious ideals and corrupting them to their own gain, which is like the one thing you can absolutely not say in like early 19th century society is shit on the church. It was like the 19th century equivalent of like what Ed Snowden did, basically.
He was the Bill Maher of his day.
Well, minus being a shitty person. Because Bill Maher is kind of a shitty person.
Yeah, I don't actually find that many things that radical about just writing radical things. And I know that's a weird position sometimes to take because writings sometimes do matter, but the writings that matter a lot more to me and the writings I see change do, rather than just add some language to a document that otherwise wouldn't have been there, and like definitely language was contributed, I can't say that, hey, revolution would not have happened if we didn't have common sense, if we didn't have idea. That's not the case in almost any sense. And also, I want to note that none of these people are good writers. Their writing all sucks. Like, clearly, one of the reasons we need global education is because we need to find better, less boring, less insular writings than these people had, which are incredibly closed-minded and incredibly detached from like what actual facts are happening. So I kind of don't want to say like this is like Ed Snowden, because no, Rousseau's nothing like Ed Snowden. Thomas Paine is nothing like Ed Snowden. These people are in the clouds rather than on the ground. And Ed Snowden's release is about information rather than about absolute truth. And you can't build a movement out of absolute truth. You build a movement out of people and about interacting with people and about facts of our lives. I think lots of people piss off the ruling class that aren't actually threats to the ruling class, though. And in some ways, Ed Snowden was much more of a threat than Voltaire or Paine or anyone else. That, like, words don't, like, proof of the First Amendment is that, well, okay, words don't do much unless you're giving an audience. We'll still give him props for not being a slave complicit asshole in some ways. Still think he's an asshole. He's still extremely sexist, just like Paine strongly.
So there we have it. Our verdict on Thomas Paine.
Our verdict on Thomas Paine. I don't really know much about him. I just know that he was mostly a philosopher. But Kit's summation of him is very similar to how I feel about like the guy who wrote fucking Walden. Who was that again?
That was Thoreau.
Yes, thank you.
I thought you said Trudeau for a second.
I was about to say Trudeau.
I was trying not to start laughing about that.
But I don't care much for Justin Trudeau either. Do we want to wrap this up?
He's an asshole. No offense to anybody in Canada listening to this, but your prime minister is an asshole. He is like literally like the embodiment of like shit lives in America. He's like, oh, I'm going to say the nice things about like climate change and then keep building pipelines. I want
to condemn American police for their treatment of their black community while I am fucking slaughtering the Wet'suwet'en people. Yeah.
Obama literally did the same thing because in 2014 he complained to, I forget which business association he was bitching to about this. He's like, you guys calling me irresponsible with this climate stuff. Well, I'm the guy who got like, it's under my administration that we're the #1 oil producer in the world. Way to talk out of both sides of your ass, Barry.
Yep. America has North America, the world has a sickness, and that sickness is neoliberalism.
Capitalism. I forget what part it was that you said was like the most cruel, like sickening part of capitalism. I actually think the real, like most sickening thing of capitalism is the way in which having empathy or giving a crap about anyone other than yourself has become stigmatized. That is probably the most insidious and sickening aspect of capitalism in its contemporary form.
Cultural alienation turned in on itself to be seen as a virtue. It's very much a facet of fascism, guys. All right. Are we comfortable with that? Do we want to wrap up right here?
That we live in a fascist state?
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah.
Yep.
It's a reality. And one day we'll talk about it. All right. I'm Scott. You can follow me or not. I don't give a shit on Twitter at Death Mullet.
I'm Kit. I don't have a Twitter, but like, tweet.
I'm Joe. I can be followed on Twitter at JLFB96.
All right, and I just want to say that we now have a Twitter, and we have an Instagram, and we have a Patreon. You can find all of those at Epic Incredulity. That's the handle we're going with for those. You can go to comraderosie.org, comrade-rosie.org, that is. And as always, that was your Epoch. Enjoy.
Incredulity.